Hello everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Jeong Suk, a professor at Kwon University. The topic of my presentation today is the current status and challenges of lifelong education for low-income groups with a focus on the case of this city. The order I will present today consists of 4 parts. Introduction, lifelong education projects for alienated groups, characteristics of participation in lifelong education of low-income groups, conclusions and suggestions. Lifelong education, a concept rooted in the idea that it is impossible for all the roles of education society requires to be fulfilled by school education, supports the right to learn as a fundamental right for all to ensure that everyone can learn at any time, anywhere. However, those who are excluded from formal education are not in a condition that allows them to benefit from continuous learning, and this education gap acts as a mechanism that further widens other social gaps. In the past, the Korean government's lifelong education policies have aimed at bridging the national education gap to resolve social polarization and build a fair society. But according to the National Lifelong Learning Participation Rate Survey of 2018, the rate of lifelong education participation among college graduates or higher was 52.3%, 1.8 times higher than among middle school graduates or lower. The purpose of this is to suggest the direction of lifelong education for low-income groups through the current status of lifelong education. This study examines the current status of lifelong education for low-income groups based on the 2018 Lifelong Education White Paper and 2018 Lifelong Education Survey Report. To analyze the government projects for low-income groups and the lifelong education projects carried out by local governments, the case of this study was examined. Analysis results of previous research. Alienated groups as a target of lifelong education encompasses different but similar concepts, or a superimposed concept. In the initial years of the lifelong education system, the terms poor and low paid were frequently used to refer to the main targets of education, but since then and until today, terms such as alienated, vulnerable, near poverty, and educational alienated groups have been used interchangeably. To define the concept vulnerable groups, educational alienated groups. The target of lifelong education set by the government's comprehensive plan for the promotion of lifelong education from its first phase to the current fourth phase. To the current fourth phase, and the terms referring to them are as follows. As you can see in this table, the first plan aimed at strengthening lifelong education for vulnerable groups and used the term educational vulnerable groups, while the second plan specified the target of lifelong education with the terms new underprivileged groups and educational vulnerable groups. In the third plan, the terms vulnerable groups and alienated groups were used together, while the fourth plan adopted the term alienated groups alone. As you can see in this table, in 2018, a total of 97 welfare programs are being implemented by the government for low-income groups, including the poverty groups. The first comprehensive plan for the promotion of lifelong education, launched in 2018, sets the following two major tasks under the slogan of lifelong education for all citizens: guaranteeing the right of all citizens to lifelong learning and establishing a lifelong learning ladder for alienated groups. As shown in the table, there are two subjects and details each under the two major tasks. If what was shown in the previous chapter is national tasks, this table presents the polished tasks of local governments. Lifelong education projects at the local government level are led by three main entities: metropolitan or provincial governments, metropolitan or provincial offices of education, and smaller regional governments. For this city, lifelong education projects are carried out by the Institute for Lifelong Education established by the metropolitan government. Libraries and lifelong learning centers of the Metropolitan Education Office and lifelong learning centers of smaller regional governments. As for the lifelong education tasks of local governments, there are tasks implemented by local governments and offices of education. There are also 8 detailed tasks under the 2 promotion tasks. This table shows the lifelong education tasks implemented by the local offices of education. Next, according to the National 2018 Lifelong Education White Paper, adults aged 25 and above show the participation rate of 52% in lifelong education in both formal and non-formal educational programs. Of all participants, 38% 9.5% were male and 42.9% were female, indicating a higher participation rate among women. This indicates that the higher the education level of citizens, the higher the participation rate in lifelong education. Significantly, the participation rate of college graduates or higher was 1.8 times higher than that of middle school graduates or lower. There was no significant differences in participation rates according to area of residence. This indicates that the lower the household's income, the lower the rate of participation in lifelong education. When it comes to non-formal education participation hours, more women than men, but men had a higher self-paid lifelong learning cost than women. The participation rates for 6 lifelong education areas set by the Lifelong Education Act were as follows. The job competency improvement area showed the highest participation rate, followed by humanities education and culture and arts. Looking at the example of city D, it is not very different from national statistics. It can be seen that the participation rate of women is slightly higher, and the higher the education level and the higher the income, the higher the participation rate. This study examined the status of lifelong education participation of low-income groups based on the results of the 2018 survey on lifelong education in this city. In this survey, a 4-member household with an average monthly income of 3,486,185 won or less in the third quarter of 2018 were considered a low-income group. 2019 Social Enterprise Certification Guidelines by the Ministry of Employment and Labor, based on the income level variable among other background variables. Therefore, households with a monthly income of 1.34 million to less than 3.12 million won were considered to belong to low-income groups in this study. A comparative analysis was conducted between this group with a monthly average income of 3.12 million won or less. Hereinafter referred to as the low-income group, and the group with an income of 3.13 million won or more, hereinafter referred to as the comparison group. A comparative analysis was conducted between this group with a monthly average income of 3.12 million won or less, and the group with an income of 3.13 million won or more. Lifelong learning participation rate. Low-income groups are 22%. Participated programs, rate of participation in culture and arts programs amounted to 112.2% in the low-income group. Job competence development programs, which amounted to 114.1%. In the low-income group is 40.4%. Participation time, 163.6% of respondents from the low-income group selected daytime on weekdays, while only 22.5% of respondents choose evening on weekdays. Purpose of participation in lifelong education, 162.3% of the low-income group respondents chose purpose is not related to their occupation. The percentage of respondents who chose job-related objectives was only 37.7%, while 25.2% of respondents chose acquisition of skills necessary for work. In terms of the purpose of participation as well, the two groups showed different tendencies. The average self-paid lifelong participation cost of the low-income group was 4.7 million won for formal education, while that of the comparison group was 3,305 million won. The average self-paid non-formal education cost of the low-income class groups was 115,000 won, and that of the comparison group was 130,000 won. Conclusions. The central and local governments of Korea have published white papers on lifelong education every year and carried out various projects for alienated groups to resolve the problem of inequality through education, which is the ultimate goal of the various lifelong education projects targeting alienated groups. However, the goal of tackling inequality through education for alienated groups still remains unfulfilled, and the education gap continues to widen. Nevertheless, the Korean government, with the introduction of the first comprehensive plan for the promotion of lifelong education, has promulgated laws to promote lifelong education for the disabled and established the National Institute for Lifelong Education for the Disabled to carry out programs tailored to the disabled. In addition, through the distribution of lifelong education vouchers, the government has included alienated groups to more actively participate in the lifelong education. Some preceding studies provide a highly positive evaluation of this lifelong education voucher project. This study provided the following significant findings regarding the current status and characteristics of lifelong education program participation of low-income groups. Low-income groups show a lower rate of participation in lifelong education than other groups. The most popular lifelong education programs among low-income groups were culture and art programs. The most preferred participation time was daytime on weekdays. And the purpose of the participation in lifelong education chosen by the most respondents were irrelevant to their occupation. Low-income groups spent relatively few hours on lifelong education participation than other groups with an average or above average income, while they had a higher self-paid learning cost. Suggestions. First, proper indicators are needed so that the central and local government's annual lifelong education white papers and survey reports can clearly present the characteristics of survey subjects according to each background variable. Second, it is necessary to identify the causes of the low rate of participation of low-income groups in lifelong education. Third, it is necessary to provide customized programs for low-income groups. First, different standards for the outcomes of lifelong education for low-income groups are needed. Thank you. If there are any questions, I shall do my best to answer them.